All right, thanks, Joe. Did you have any wrap up on the exercise? Anything else you want to say about that?
I just want people to take away that, you know, that counting dams and counting jams is something you can do with a huge array of precisions, right? So don't be afraid to just open up what's free and do it on a map and get a preliminary answer. It's going to give you some example ideas of what's going on. Maybe that's good enough for initial planning. You need to take a closer look. Get out on site. Go talk with people. Go look at stuff. Use better evidence. I just want to instill that it's approachable and folks can do it.
Great. Yeah, one of the things I guess I'll ask, this is a topic that it's probably one of the more difficult questions to answer when we're doing these workshops is, how much is enough? You've got tools like BRAT, the Beaver Restoration Assessment Tool, that kind of help predict dam capacity based on the features in the landscape.
Yeah.
But when it comes to wood accumulation in particular, I kind of struggle a little bit. Can you talk a little bit more about, are there certain settings? Is it, forests, or where should we be expecting wood and how much wood?
Yeah, that's a great. Well, I would go back to what we highlighted in the morning session at the end. Some of the papers, the review papers, conceptualizing wood will kind of lay out a framework for some of those expectations. And yeah, I mean, it's going to be extremely different if you're in New England, if you're in boreal forests up north, if you're in the Intermountain West or the Pacific Northwest, right? But there is a rich literature, and there is a lot of empirical information on certainly on the what sort of loading rates is what they're referred to in terms of how much wood is present. Just counts per mile, essentially. There's a lot of information on what is, but there is some on what was historically. There is a sister, well, maybe it's better to call it a bastard stepchild to BRAT, which is RAT, the Wood Restoration Assessment Tool, which needs some love, but don't wait around for those dumb tools. I mean, it's essentially trying to do that, and what it's looking at is what's the availability of vegetation that if it fell, could be recruited from hill slopes or floodplains. What's the position of that vegetation if it's on outside bends where you map those confining margins? Is it something it could access? What's the height of the vegetation? So if I got a 100-foot tree and a 10-foot wide channel, that's a very different situation than a 10-foot tree falling into a 100-foot wide channel in terms of how it can move. And then we've got Velcro, right? How much of that wood is around to obstruct its movement. And people freak out about wood moving and being dynamic. That's why we have all this obsession with locking it down, because we're afraid of it impacting infrastructure. Well, the neat thing about when you get up to healthy, not anemic wood loading levels is wood doesn't move that far. When there's a lot of Velcro in the system, it's not that scary of a thing, even in built environments.
Yeah, great, thank you. Another question from a participant here talks about, I guess, restoration potential, and when should we shoot to restore like just the immediate currently accessible valley bottom versus the valley bottom with a terrace, that how do you make those kinds of decisions to know what's in play there? Will we get to that here shortly?
Yeah, after the break. It's a spot on question. Briefly, first, throw away having to be right. We're going to couch everything in adaptive management, and we're going to couch it conservatively so that the significance of you being wrong doesn't have consequences. Okay, so what I mean by that is, if you're in a situation where there's so much critical infrastructure and there's all these constraints, you're gonna, that's where you spend the money and you bring in experts and whatever. But if you're in a low risk situation where the consequences of you being wrong are minimal, don't worry about it. The short of it too is with mapping valley bottoms, overestimate initially. We're going to overestimate on valley bottoms because that is not just our net for opportunity, it's our net for looking at risk carefully and closely. So you're better to cast a broader net there. But then when we get to the question of recovery potential after the break, recovery potential, we want to be more conservative and realistic, right? Not get too carried away. And that's a fairly safe way to manage those expectations. Does that make sense, Jeremy?
It does, yeah, thank you. Maybe just one final question here. You know, this idea of structural starvation sounds pretty new. How accepted is this in riverscape restoration? Is there you've provided some of the bits and pieces of science behind the importance of wood and beavers, but you know, this concept of structural starvation, is that becoming more accepted paradigm?
Well, I mean, the label, I can't tell you where I stole that from. I'm pretty sure I didn't coin it, but I latched onto it because I like analogies for explaining things, and I'm obsessed with that whole health and food and diet analogy for riverscapes. So whether or not the term structurally starved is really getting that much traction, there's a little bit of traction in literature. That's not super common. The concept of systems not having anywhere near the number of beaver dams or anywhere near the number of wood jams, et cetera, that they would have had historically is, I mean, that's very well established. So the cutesy label is just something that, yeah, you can take or leave. The question, though, is not, you don't have to describe the degree. You just have to describe whether or not it is, so that you don't exit, right? If it clearly is not structurally starved, then yeah, you want to think carefully, and there's your exit point, as is shown on the screen.
Great. All right, well, let's let you move on to the next piece, or the break here.
Well, I'm going to let you guys all move on. We are at 2:30.